What the actual fuck? Diana groaned and rolled out of bed. Her face was so itchy, and the smell of the booze from last night, coupled with the stench of the cigarettes she'd sworn she would keep away from, almost made her retch on the floor. She wobbled to her feet, rubbed her face, and drew in a few deep breaths to get her mind back into it. Her head was pounding. She felt weak and sick, and this damn itch was driving her crazy. With a loud groan, she shook her head and felt something falling from her hair like snow. Probably confetti, she thought, hoped, and felt flashes of last night coming back to her. The stinking bar, all those guys hitting on her. Then, on her way home, the curb she had missed. Diana rubbed her forehead and felt the bump in her skin. Just great. She moaned and winced, and felt her stomach suddenly cramping up and started running toward the bathroom. She almost stumbled over the pile of clothing on the floor to her bedroom and felt a gust of hot air coming out of the small vent next to it. The world was starting to spin around her. Diana felt this lurching feeling in her belly and knew her time was running out. She had to clamp one hand over her mouth to stop herself from making a mess somewhere in her apartment as she rushed through the small accommodation. The glaring light on the off-white tiles in the bathroom made the world spin even faster, and Diana only felt relieved when she found her spot in front of the toilet. This was bad. She kept thinking on repeat, while her vision blurred and she felt her stomach turning into a single ball of glowing metal. She should have held back more yesterday. Yeah, those thoughts plagued her after each and every such night, yet she never learned. The fun, the time not worrying about her life's problems was well worth it. At least during the evening. Not so much the morning after. Well, at least today she had woken up alone. Diana tried to lift her spirits as she finally managed to get her head out of the bowl and sat back on the cold tiles, enjoying the probably short respite. The bump on her head felt strange, and as she allowed herself to lie back and carefully touch the protrusion, she thought she could feel a sheen of what had to be sweat on her skin. Ouch. Diana groaned and closed her eyes. The world was still spinning around her. She felt the muscles in her legs and arms shaking, but at least she didn't feel the urge to throw up again. How much did she drink yesterday? Well, in her mind, she went down the list, then stopped at what was probably the halfway point and didn't bother to go on. Too much. She should leave it at that, Diana thought with a frown. This wasn't the first rough morning she'd had, but it somehow felt worse than pretty much all of the rest. Maybe it was because she, even though she was completely drunk, hadn't slept at all. Usually, once she managed to get home from those outings, she fell into a deep slumber without dreams or worries. But not last night. Strange nightmares had kept her half awake, and even though she could taste the sick on her tongue right now, she somehow still remembered an even worse smell from her dreams. An earthy one, mixed with blood. The memory made her sit up and hold onto the bowl once more, even though her stomach still felt completely cramped up. She could feel it getting worse. What a shit way to spend the morning. What felt like half an hour passed with her in that position, always trying to keep a steady breath while the alcohol made her life a living hell. After that, she finally managed to drink a sip of water from the sink without throwing that up immediately as well. Then got her pillow and blanket and laid down in front of the toilet again. Less distance, Diana thought to herself. She curled up on the tiles, then put her head down and gave out a loud sigh. At least, like that, she could get a few more hours of rest. The outside was dark, as far as she could see through the small window up on the wall of the bathroom, so she hadn't missed much yet. Diana grimaced as she turned her head and the bum touched the side of the pillow, but she forced herself to keep her eyes closed. It wouldn't do her any good to touch and prod it right now. First, she needed sleep and to somehow get her thoughts in order again. The bum could wait for a few more hours. Slowly, she started to drift off to sleep. Her body began to relax, and she could feel the cold tiles beneath her warming up as her breathing became regular and the tension slowly lessened, then faded. Diana was floating in darkness, but the normal calm she should be feeling was nowhere to be found. Something was different again. She wasn't alone. Somewhere beneath her, around her, things were moving. But not human beings. No. There was this strange noise of small, hard legs scratching over a surface, skittering around. Insects or the like, she thought, and felt herself shivering on the tiles. Diana turned her head, but couldn't see anything besides the complete darkness surrounding her. Was this a dream? No, at least not really. She could still think, could feel the pillow and blanket, yet her mind seemed a million miles away from her body. Another sound reached her ears. Tiny legs skittering around. It was coming from beneath her, then from her side. She could make it out clearly if she concentrated on it. And it wasn't just a single thing. No, they were everywhere. She could smell them here as well. This earthy, musty odor seemed to even block out the stench of her own sick. Diana felt uncomfortable, on edge. Her mind told her to get away from where she was right now, even though she couldn't say for sure where to or how. The strange drifting, weightless sensation didn't stop or change, no matter if she tried turning or not. And all the while, the sound of those legs skittering across the floor somewhere below was continuing on. Were they following her? Waiting for her to drift down closer? She could feel a chill in her bones as she thought about it. They knew she was there. Diana had no doubts about that. Her hand shot out and hit the cold porcelain of the toilet, and the darkness around her disappeared immediately. With her stomach still completely cramped up and now the droning headache, she could feel the world spinning once more. Diana pulled herself up into a sitting position to reach the bowl, but now nothing except air was coming out of her. What was going on here? She felt completely sick and had started to sweat, but all the while, she thought she could still hear the clicking and scraping of tiny legs everywhere around her. Was that some kind of hallucination? Did someone drug her? It was possible. She felt her stomach lurching again, closed her eyes, and prayed that at least one of the symptoms would soon pass. Diana's shoulders started to ache from holding onto the toilet, and while the uneasy feeling still hadn't vanished, she slowly let herself sink down again. The noises surrounding her hadn't stopped either, and neither had the spinning motion of the bathroom. She felt exhausted, mentally and physically. "Please, just give me a few hours," Diana begged as she slowly put her head onto the pillow and grimaced. She took another deep breath and smelled that strange and earthy musk lingering on her lips. It didn't help with her stomach problems at all. Diana turned her head and pulled the blanket over herself again. It wasn't like she could take some medicine for it. Even that tiny sip of water had come up again, which meant swallowing pills would be completely useless. She groaned again and closed her eyes. The tiny legs around her seemed to increase once more. She could hear them and now feel them as well. It wasn't a full-on sensation of insects running over her, but she felt like the wind started to touch her. Just the tiniest amount of it, but enough to tickle the hairs on her arms. She felt a shiver running through her whole body, tossed and turned, and then woke up with a scream as the bump on her forehead touched the porcelain in front of her. The pain was shooting through her whole head and down into her spine as she cried and turned and sobbed. Those noises soon changed into curses as Diana slowly got up to her knees while tears were still clouding her vision. What else could go wrong? She asked in her mind. This was torture. Her stomach was lurching again, but she forced herself to stay still a few seconds longer. The pain was helping her, at least in that regard. Then again, it made her eyes water, and it didn't seem to diminish even after what felt like minutes had passed. Diana hit the floor with her hand, and the slapping sound of the tiles seemed to push through the pain and skittering noises that still filled her ears. Something was wrong here, a part of her mind warned her. This wasn't a normal hangover. Never before in her life had she ever felt this sick and this haunted, for lack of better words. It kind of felt like she'd been cursed. Diana screamed again in pain and staggered up to her feet. She needed water. Her throat was completely dried out, her ears were ringing, and her stomach was rebelling. But she felt it all the same. The thirst. Almost blind, she stumbled around until she finally found the cold porcelain of the sink, then propped herself against it and reached out to the faucet. The pain was mind-numbing. She could feel her shoulders starting to shake as she carefully brought down her head and held it directly beneath the stream of cold water. Diana suddenly felt a rush as the icy liquid touched her hair, then her head, then ran down the sides of her face. The pain seemed to freeze, and for a moment she felt completely normal again. Gone were those chittering noises, the agony of her cramped-up stomach, and the feeling of almost vertigo. She could finally think clearly for a moment. Something was wrong. This wasn't normal. Those thoughts shot around her mind. She needed to do something. It was getting worse, not better. Cold water ran across the bump on her forehead, and the chill mixed with the searing hot pain. She could feel it, shooting down inside her skull and straight into her teeth as she snapped her mouth shut and pulled back. Vertigo suddenly set in again, and Diana had to hold onto the sink to not fall over. Water was running down her back, and her forehead seemed to change from hot to cold with every breath she took. She blinked away the tears, carefully wiped her face, and felt the nausea getting worse again. Only now, she didn't have time to kneel down before the toilet. Her whole body shivered, but her instincts told her to keep standing. That there was something here, hidden by the curtain of tears almost blinding her. She wiped her eyes again with one hand, while the other one still held onto the sink. In the grey scene in front of her, where she could only see the outline of the white porcelain sink, Diana suddenly spotted something that seemed to pop out. It was next to the faucet. Small and jade green. She staggered, blinked, and slowly shook her head. The picture got a tiny bit clearer. Was it one of her earrings? No, none of her jewelry was green. At least none had that shade. She moved again, blew on it, and the thing suddenly vanished, as if it had never been there at all. Diana felt confused, turned on the sink, and this time drank from it with deep sips. She didn't have time to care for that strange green splotch. Her body yearned for water, and she felt the dehydration headaches making the pain in her skull worse already. First, she needed to get herself up and running again. Then she could worry about whatever she had seen next to the faucet. Diana groaned and closed her eyes. There was the noise again. Skittering legs all around her. She could feel a chill running up from her feet through her whole body, ending in her head, where it felt like her skull might crack from the shivers. Just hold it for a few minutes, Diana mumbled to herself, standing there with closed eyes. All she needed was to let her body absorb at least a bit of the water before she'd spew out the rest. Every single drop would help, would lessen the headaches and clear her mind. She ignored all the sounds around her, except for the beating of her own heart. It still had a steady rhythm. Slightly elevated, but fine. Whatever else was wrong with her, her body was still strong. She repeated that sentence in her mind while she gritted her teeth, then concentrated on her own breathing. The sour stench was still all over her and in her mouth. The disgusting one, of sweat and sick. But she had to endure. Soon, once she was strong enough to brush her teeth and take a shower, she could do something about it. Then she'd feel like a new person, Diana promised herself. Her legs were still shaking, and she was feeling the pull of gravity forcing her to cling to the sink. Just a bit more, she repeated, then took a deep breath. She could hear the water in her stomach, and finally felt it relaxing a bit. Diana couldn't help but smile through the pain, then slowly lowered herself and pulled the blanket over her body. This was good. A very positive sign. Maybe she'd managed to keep the water inside of her for once, which would help her immensely. Diana put her head on the pillow and closed her eyes. The best thing to do right now was to sleep. Just a few hours until the worst had passed. When she opened them again, the whole world would look different. She tried to calm her breathing, listened to the now finally slowing beat of her own heart, and relaxed her shoulders. Beneath her, the cold tiles warmed up and seemingly disappeared as she started drifting through the endless dark once more. Only this time, it was calm. Diana could feel herself floating in now absolute silence. Content and hopeful that the worst had passed already. She didn't dream, didn't see anything. But in those moments, she truly felt at peace for the first time since last night. That was until a single clicking sound suddenly reached her ears. It wasn't hectic like the skittering legs before, but calm. something inside her mind started to scream. Diana, still floating, shifted her body, and suddenly she could see a spot in the darkness. Jade green, it popped out of the black surroundings, somewhere below her. She could feel her heart beating faster already. It was small, tiny, yet she couldn't tell if that was just down to the distance from her. The clicking noise repeated, and as if on command, another spot appeared close by the first one. It had the same jade green color. This was bad, her mind warned her. Something deep inside her stirred. Another clicking sound, and suddenly there were a dozen of those strange green spots. Some were a bit bigger, others smaller. They were multiplying. No, waking up to a presence. Diana could see one of them slowly starting to move, and with it, the strange noise of skittering legs filled the air. Wandering Dot touched others, and more of those things appeared in the darkness. They started to move. All of them. Diana could hear them clearly. Their legs scraped over an unseen ground as they started to congregate beneath her. They moved with her, stayed with her. "You have been found," a voice seemed to scream inside her head, and Diana bolted upright on the white tiled floor of the bathroom. She could feel herself sweating and her stomach lurching, but she forced her body to stop and stay still. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see something. Green and tiny against the white porcelain of the sink. With a now racing heart, Diana slowly turned her head. It really was here, standing on the edge of the sink, stretching out two legs toward her. She could feel the hair on the nape of her neck rising as she slowly got to her knees. Her vision was still blurry, but not as bad as before. As she strained her eyes, she could see it against the white backdrop. A spider with a jade green back and a black body. 8 eyes all fixated on her. Diana grabbed hold of the toilet bowl to push herself up. The nausea was forgotten, as was the headache. This thing standing there had followed her out of her dreams. She stared at it, just as it stared at her. It knew she was here, had been looking for her, Diana's instincts told her. She came to her feet, still unsteady, but now she could finally see it up close. It shifted and moved slowly to bring its 2 front legs up. Yeah, it was facing her. There was no doubt about that. She could feel a shiver running up her spine again. Diana looked at it closely. She had no idea what kind of spider it was, besides that it wasn't a tarantula. A few weeks ago, she'd watched a few short videos about them, but that didn't help her right now. It had a round belly and was completely black other than its back, which was green. The legs were long and thin, but not hairy. This thing, it looked dangerous, even though its body wasn't bigger than her fingernail. She moved one hand over it and could see the thing trying to reach up immediately. As its body shifted, Diana finally caught a glimpse of 2 fangs below its eyes and pulled back her hand quickly. No, she shouldn't play around with this thing, her instincts warned her. Diana stepped back on wobbly legs and turned her head ever so slightly, unwilling to let the thing out of her sight. If it dropped down to the floor, she would scream and jump, she knew. And that was, right now, probably the worst thing she could do in her body's current condition. Diana could feel the sweat running down her back as she fumbled around for anything to squash the spider with. She couldn't look behind her for fear of letting this thing out of her eyes as she slowly circled around it. There was an old can of hairspray here somewhere, she knew, but couldn't for the life of her remember where exactly. The thing on the sink was moving along with her. It was keeping her in its sight, just as she did. What did it want? Diana knew that spiders hardly ever attacked on their own, especially not animals that were that much bigger than them. You would need to invade their space to get bitten for real. But this thing somehow made her feel like it was already targeting her. Her fingertips brushed against a metal can that wobbled at the first touch, and she quickly took hold of it. Even though she still felt sick and weak, the adrenaline now coursing through her veins helped her immensely. Once she had squashed the spider, she would definitely need to change rooms, though. There was no way she would stay here after seeing that thing. Diana lifted up the can, then froze. Her eyes were still trained on the spider up front, on the sink, but a sudden movement behind it made her stop. There, by the faucet, she could see something moving. Legs. They were crawling out of the shadows, moving a body that was twice as big as the first spider onto the white porcelain. Diana could feel herself shivering again. A second one was coming around the sink. How many of them were there? In horror, she watched as the second spider sidled up to the first one, taking position right next to it while extending two legs as well, scratching at the air between her and them. Diana heard the empty can clunking to the floor. There was no way in hell she would approach them now. She pushed herself back toward the door, and suddenly, the two spiders stopped their incessant movement. They watched her closely as she grabbed hold of the frame. No, she needed to get out of there. Diana turned on her heel and grabbed the door just as she saw the first of them dropping from the sink. Slamming the entrance shut, she ran through the hallway and toward her bedroom, now somehow sure those two spiders would try and follow her. Her heart was racing out of control as she ran through her apartment, finally reached the door of the bedroom, and slammed this one shut as well. The dress she'd worn yesterday was still bunched up on the floor, and Diana grabbed it and used it to block the gap at the bottom of the entrance before slowly stumbling back into her bed. What was going on here? She asked herself. This was completely insane. Where had those spiders come from? Her heartbeat was drumming in her ears, almost drowning out the rushing of blood. She could feel her whole body shaking, the cold sweat covering her skin. This wasn't normal, she repeated in her mind. Those things might really come after her. She needed to call someone. Diana turned around and looked at her nightstand where she usually left her phone. It wasn't there. Shit. She cursed in her mind while trying to remember where she had put it. Was it still in her purse? Then it would be by the front door, probably. Diana groaned and sobbed as she staggered around the room. What should she do? She didn't dare to open the door again. What if she saw the two spiders already waiting there for her? With the droning of her heartbeat in her skull and the shivers running up and down her spine, she was completely overwhelmed. Diana wiped her brow and immediately felt a shooting pain as her hand touched the bump on her forehead. The pain was different now, yet not any less agonizing. She closed her eyes, staggered, and then caught herself on the wardrobe. Cursing loudly, Diana opened her eyelids. Through gritted teeth, she continued to howl. and suddenly stopped again. She was standing in front of the big mirror, looking at herself, and what she saw in the reflection made her fall silent. This woman looking out at her seemed different from what she had expected. Her skin had this sick undertone. Her eyes were bloodshot and her lips were completely dried out. With strands of hair standing off in every direction and this manic look in her wide pupils, she seemed more like a corpse than a living being. But the worst thing was the bump on her forehead. Big and swollen, it stood out, and Diana wanted to scream as her fingertips slowly came closer and closer to it. It wasn't just swollen. No, there was something moving there. She could feel her heart almost stopping as she realized it and looked even closer. Behind the skin, long and thin legs were shifting and turning. The more she stared, the clearer the movements got. She could feel it as well. An itch under the skin of her forehead, right where now a green dot appeared. And the noise reached her ears again. Countless legs scraping over something, moving thin and small bodies. Diana howled and pushed herself off the wardrobe. She needed to get out of here. Her mind was going blank with fright. With one hand, she ripped open the door, now completely in a panic, as she jumped over the threshold and ran up the hallway again. There was the vent. Only this time, she could see something poking out from between the struts. Thin and spindly legs were scratching the air outside, as long as her forearm. Diana screamed as she raced past it. She howled in pain and fright, jumped and ran as she crashed into the wall, but pushed herself off immediately. There were green dots everywhere, coming out of every shadow, crawling over every surface. Diana almost closed her eyes and ran for the front door. She needed to get out of here, to get help. She ripped at the lock, pushed open the door, and stumbled out into the apartment's hallway, screaming. The door of her neighbor flew open, and Diana almost cried as the old man looked out at her. He was talking, but she couldn't hear a single word he said. There, between his teeth, she could see spindly legs reaching out from his mouth. She turned and ran for the stairs. They were everywhere, coming for her. Diana saw a maintenance guy staring at her with wide open eyes, extending his hands as she ran past him. She could see it in him as well, his legs coming from every orifice. Green dots in his eyes as spiders moved behind them. Diana howled, felt his touch, and kicked out at him before he screamed as well. She lost her balance and tumbled, could see the stairs leading down as she fell, and hit the steps with the back of her head. Her own scream echoed in her mind as she felt herself rolling down the stairs, and all the while, the sound of those spiders crawling around her forehead filled her ears. It was dark behind her eyelids now. She had regained consciousness a few minutes ago, but didn't dare to open her eyes. People were talking close by. Doctors, she assumed. She was dosed with something bad. No. Whatever the girl took, it seems to have broken her. The old female voice replied. Diana didn't dare speak up. She could smell it, feel it, even though she was strapped to a gurney. 8 legs resting on either side of her arms. The tox screen came back positive for a whole bunch of things. If someone dosed her with all of that, they might have wanted to kill her outright. Diana could hear it as well. A giant spider hovering just a hair's breadth from her face. Its fangs slowly rubbed up against each other. For now, we're gonna keep her sedated. We have no idea how her brain is gonna handle it all. For all we know, she might be stuck in this psychosis. The earthy smell filled her nostrils as one of the 8 legs brushed past her arm. It was waiting for her to open her eyes. She knew. Wanted to see its prey alive and well before it sunk its fangs into it. Diana shivered and bit her tongue. No sound, she told herself, and felt the thing sitting above her clicking its fangs again. No noise, she repeated in her mind, but she screamed in her head for help that wouldn't come.